Hi, this is Matt McCormick. I'm in the Department of Philosophy at California State University, Sacramento. My email address is mccormick@csus.edu. Please feel free to email me with any questions you might have about what I'm about to discuss in this lecture. This lecture is my discussion of Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, chapters 6 through 9. It's part of my Inductive Logic Phil 61 course. It's useful for lots of things, but more specifically, it's about those chapters in Kahneman. Also, I should point out what is the role, as I see it, of these lectures for my course. In some cases, I am selecting, emphasizing, and interpreting some of the discussions that Kahneman has in his book that I think deserve more emphasis or deserve more explanation. In many cases, I am supplementing Kahneman's discussion. I am adding more background, more issues, more concepts, and enhancing the material. So they are not the same. You couldn't get by in my course with one and not the other. You need both. And in at least some cases where I remember to do so, I will try to flag some of the information, some of the ideas that I'm adding that's not in Kahneman, but I can't be relied upon to always indicate those. So it will be an exercise for you, my audience, to read Kahneman carefully and understand his arguments, listen and study to my lecture carefully and understand what I'm talking about. And also leave it as a project to you to figure out where I get Kahneman wrong, which no doubt I will get him wrong, or other places where I'm going to make mistakes. So let's talk about those 4 chapters. We've been talking about this distinction, this dual process theory that Kahneman discusses is coming from a huge literature in cognitive psychology, where dual process theory is this idea that there are 2 big systems, system 1 and system 2, in the human brain that are responsible for their integration, is responsible for our cognitive performance. And this section of the book is focusing largely on system 1. System 1, his main function is to maintain and update a model of your personal world, which represents what is normal in it. The model is constructed by associations that link ideas of circumstances, events, actions, and outcomes that co-occur with some regularity, either at the same time or within a relatively short interval. As these links are formed and strengthened, the pattern of associated ideas comes to represent the structure of events in your life, and it determines your interpretation of the present as well as your expectations of the future. That's an excellent quote that captures the big picture here. And one of the points I'm going to emphasize that he doesn't talk about so much is that this is an evolved system. This is a system built out of meat, out of cellular tissue. And over the course of evolution, the cognitive system has developed to deal with and adapt and structure its behavior to survive in hostile external environments. And the system in many ways is metabolic, it's organic, and it works in very simple ways, much simpler than we may have thought, being the sort of the writer or the product of this complicated neurobiological metabolic function. So let's talk about some of the ways in which it functions. Kahneman makes a distinction between active and passive surprise. What surprises us? Well, some expectations that we have when we're navigating around the world are active and conscious. For example, you know that you are waiting for a particular event to happen. You're poised and ready for it. You're waiting for it. You're a batter who's at bat waiting to get the pitch. Or your kid is due home from school. You expect the door to open and to hear a familiar voice. You're primed and ready for that event to happen. So it's primed up and ready in your system. There's a larger category of passive expectations that your brain has developed through its experience that are always running in the background. And if one of those expectations is violated, you're surprised in yet a different way. So, for example, this actually happened to me. You see your next door neighbor in an airport terminal in Chicago during the holidays. I was walking through an airport terminal 3,000 miles from home, and there's the guy that lives next to me in Sacramento. And now the association of seeing Brad in that spot is so strong that when I go back through, it's so strong and it's formed so readily and so easily that that one experience now leads me, when I go to Chicago and I go through that airport terminal, I think about seeing Brad there. I almost expect to see him. So that's an example of my passive expectation being violated. I was surprised when I saw him there, and now on the basis of just one event that was rather memorable, I locate or fix this surprising event, and I expect to see it happen over and over again. This is this association that my brain has made with that spot. Our brains adapt to and quickly formulate a model about what's supposed to happen in the world on the basis of very little information, and then it uses that to make predictions constantly about what's going to happen around me, what to expect, what to be prepared for, what problems to solve, what to be afraid of, and so on when I'm navigating through my life. We constantly update our expectations about what's normal. We form passive and active expectations very quickly, and then we plan and act accordingly. Okay, so as a result then, we have active and passive surprise. Here's Kahneman's question. How many animals of each kind did Moses take into the ark? Now, you made a mistake, perhaps, there when you read this the first time in Kahneman's book, or when you heard me say it. Maybe you caught it right away, but there's something about that that's kind of coherent. If you weren't paying close attention, you might not have noticed that Moses is not the one who put animals on an ark. It's Noah who put animals on an ark. And Kahneman invokes or gives a term that he calls norm theory, and he explains it in more depth in the book. That explains our mistake. We detect associative coherence, so the question gets accepted. System 1 glosses quickly through problems. If there's not a glaring big issue, it will move quickly and it will not throw up a red flag. So the Moses sentence didn't cause a problem. But an example like this, a chicken has 3 legs, feels more false than the sentence, a chicken has four legs. Both sentences are false, but somehow, because the second one is an even number and 2s and 4s are more comfortable in the thought of animals and legs, a chicken has 4 legs doesn't bother us as much and doesn't violate our norms as strongly as a chicken has 3 legs. Because if I had said, how many animals of each kind did Obama take onto the ark, you'd immediately catch the mistake. But since I said Moses, which is close to Noah, and you associate it with Old Testament Bible stories perhaps, the thing slides by and doesn't throw up the red flag and doesn't violate our systems. Okay, so you're constantly forming and rearranging and reforming these models, predictive models about what's coming, what's going to happen in the world, and then you act accordingly, change your behavior, and so on. Here's another example that Kahneman gives. After spending a day exploring beautiful sights in the crowded streets of New York, Jane discovered that her wallet was missing. Now notice very quickly, you do a thing when you hear that story. Imagine the term pickpocket versus sights brought up after you heard this little story. How do you feel about those two words? It turns out that when you test people on this kind of story, we associate the word pickpocket with the story more readily and more easily than we do the word sights, even though sights is actually in the story. So Kahneman did some research on this, or he cites some research where people connect pickpocket. You ask them later, what story did you read in the study, or what happened in the case, and people will pick up on and insert or offer up pickpocket, and they'll associate it more with the story than sights. That's because they're doing something that I call overactive causal theorizing. That when you got that rather dissonant story about her wallet going missing, you went searching for an explanation, and your brain provided or has a kind of associative coherence with the idea of pickpocketing, explaining why she was in New York, it was crowded, there were streets, she was around all day, and her wallet went missing. Well, that's an incoherence, or that's a frictiony story that's screaming for an explanation. It's screaming for a causal account. And that's the way we're built, is to worry about these things that are dangerous, that are harmful, that'll do us, or maybe do us some good. We're constantly very aggressively trying to find those in our environments and insert them and figure them out. Okay, so we are, and this is me, not Kahneman, overactive causal theorizers. And here's what I mean by that. I need to come up with a catchier name for it. Our cognitive systems actively search for, build, hypothesize, and formulate causal connections on very slim information on the basis of mere association or very little information. It just takes a couple of cases for us, or even a single instance for us to connect and start putting things together and start suggesting that there's causal connections. Imagine a new set of parents who've got a newborn baby, and the baby's crying about this or that, can't figure it out. Well, our systems are built to solve that problem, to get that baby happy. Millions of years of evolution has crafted this cognitive system that's trying to fix that baby and get that baby up to genetic reproductive age so that we can keep our genes in the gene pool. And when that baby's crying, I got to figure out what it is. And I just start trying things. You make sure that their diaper's okay. You make sure that they're fed. You make sure that they've got enough water. You check their temperature. You actively and aggressively try all sorts of things. And you try this and it works. Okay, you latch onto that as the explanation, and now I've got an operative account of what's going on with that baby. I need to figure it out fast, or else you've got a sick or alien or worse baby. Right? So it's in our interest, and there's evolutionary pressure for us to figure these things out quickly before something goes bad. So Kahneman's got an excellent example here from the Gulf War. This is going way back to 9/11. These are two headlines from the same day, I think from the Wall Street Journal. So when they captured Saddam Hussein in Iraq during the Gulf War, this is the first headline. U.S. Treasuries rise, that's on the stock market. Hussein capture may not curb terrorism. Okay, so what happens is that when the stock market is, at least the common conventional wisdom is that when the stock market is suffering, people will move their money into U.S. Treasuries because they're safer. But when people think that the economy is safe, they'll move their money out of U.S. Treasuries and put them into the stock market at large. So this was someone at the Wall Street Journal trying to explain the fact that U.S. Treasury values had shot up after Hussein had been captured. You'd think that once we captured Saddam Hussein, then everybody feels safe. Well, apparently that doesn't curb terrorism. So then 30 minutes later, U.S. Treasuries sink on the stock market, and the next headline just 30 minutes later was Hussein capture boosts allure of risky assets. Well, look, it can't be both, right? It can't, but notice how quickly we sort of insert the causal explanation. Oh, it must be Saddam Hussein that's causing the rise or fall. And it may be, probably turns out that it was neither, or that there was no real causal account here. Kahneman talks about this later in the book. Very often, our overactive causal theorizing will lead us to posit some explanation of what's happening on the stock market, or what's happening with some very complicated or very informationally rich system. We think we understand it when in fact there's no rhyme nor reason. There's a lot of randomness. There's a lot of noise in the system. There's just ups and downs that can't easily be explained with an account that's only, what is that, 6 words long. It's naive to think that whatever's going on in the stock market can be explained in 6 words, or that there's some trend overall. But both of those headlines come out in the same day in the course of 30 minutes. But what's going on here is that evolution built us to try to figure out what's going on fast with minimal information before we get killed, eaten, maimed, poisoned, or our baby dies, or whatever else bad happens to us. There's a high, call this an existence bias. There's a very powerful set of biases or proclivities in our cognitive systems to do the things that keep us alive, that solve its problems, that keep us going to the next day, so that we can stay alive, have babies, pass on our genetic information. Why the rush to judgment? Well, the rush here is that evolution didn't allow time for careful and balanced gathering of information and the thoughtful, judicious reflection before drawing a conclusion. Look, those berries are poisonous, and you've got to figure that out quickly. If you eat them and they give you a stomach ache, and you go back and eat them 10 more times to find out, well, maybe it was something else, or maybe I was already going to have a stomach ache, or something else is doing it. If you go back and gather all that information and do all that research, you're going to be a dead hominid. And you don't have time, for instance, with this graphic image of an early hominid getting captured, getting killed by a leopard. You don't have time to ask the question, what was that noise that actually happened behind me? Maybe I should go investigate. Maybe I should go see what that twig snap was. You need to just react and run. Right? So you've got an overactive imagination about threats, about dangers, about things that are out there in your environment. You need to stay alive. And staying alive means you got to act quickly, and that means that you have a host of biases or heuristics or fast shorthand tools or devices in your cognitive system that are just good enough to get you to the next day. And that's partly what I mean by an existence bias. The way we used to think about fallacies is a kind of error in reasoning. But the way the biases and heuristics approach comes out in Kahneman is that, look, you've got an organic system that evolved to solve cognitive tasks in fast-moving, very quickly changing, dangerous external environments. And evolution is not a thinking, planning device. It doesn't plan to build these systems in the optimal way. What it did was, over the course of millions of years, for some organisms, they happened to develop cognitive systems that then get crafted and sculpted in ways that keep them alive and give them adaptive advantages in some circumstances. And so you've got a cognitive system that's a product of that environment that has a lot of quick and dirty rules for how to deal with things that are happening, what to do when you hear a noise, whether or not you should continue to eat the berries. I'll give you some good examples. This is not in Kahneman, but it's directly relevant. It's called the Garcia Effect. And you know the Garcia Effect. You've actually suffered from it. In a single instance, rats, not rates, rats given flavored water before being exposed to radiation quickly developed a powerful aversion to the flavor of the water after the sickness and nausea from the radiation. That is, they took rats and just gave them water, and then they radiated them. And the radiation made them sick. But what did the rat do? The rat connected drinking the water with getting sick. So now it goes, I'm staying away from the water. Same thing happens when you go out and drink too much tequila. You have a great night, you drink a whole bunch of shots of tequila, it's a great time until it's not a great time, and then the next day you're severely hungover, and now what do? All I got to do is say the word tequila or the smell of tequila is enough. Just this one bad night, even if you've had lots of good nights on tequila, just this one bad night is enough to make you swear off, I'm never drinking tequila again. That's a good example of this sort of high side bias where your system says, stay the hell away from the tequila. Stay the hell away from the berries. That made me kind of sick. I'm not going near that. I don't know what's really going on there, but I can't risk it. It's too potentially that could kill me, right? Or that might be a bad thing. So the Garcia effect is that thing that you've had when you were a kid and you were sick, you had a high fever and your mom gave you popsicles and now you can't eat popsicles. Or you had macaroni and cheese that one time, you got food poisoned in that one case, and now you can't even go near macaroni and cheese. It's this overgeneralizing effect. It's you making a hasty generalization is the way philosophers would have used to talk about the mistake, but it's you trying to come up with rapid heuristics or rapid rules about what can I do in the world that'll get me by, what will keep me alive. So now maybe you can restore or revive tequila in your life if you understand what's going on. Okay, now here's another thing that's not in Kahneman that I find really interesting and pertinent. Part of the explanation that I'm giving here is from something called error management theory. And there's a technical name here, but once you understand it, it's a very powerful tool and really interesting. The technical definition of error management theory, EMT, is this. In circumstances where the costs of types of error, and we're going to talk about false negative or false positive errors, when the costs are asymmetrical, where one type of error is more detrimental to fitness than another, then a system that is biased toward committing the less costly error may be more adaptive than the unbiased system. Okay, so this is a way of saying, according to error management theory, that evolution has kind of sold you out. Evolution is always making fast, quick, and dirty decisions, And it's not that it tried to equip you with perfect judgment or perfect reasoning ability. You will always make errors. There are always limits to how much time, energy, effort, cognitive resources, calories you can put into any decision. Some decisions aren't that important. You shouldn't dump all your work into it. You need to make quick decisions and move on. So not everything matters that much. And you have limited cognitive resources for solving all these problems during the day. You're going to make 100 decisions. You've got to meter out or delegate which cognitive resources you're going to give to which decisions. Okay, so you're going to make errors. And if it turns out that some kinds of errors, maybe false positives or maybe false negatives, are more costly than others, then the way the evolution will build you then is to steer you to have a bias in favor of the less costly mistake. So if I'm going to build you and you're going to make mistakes, I should have you make the mistakes that cost less. And you'll actually recognize these examples. They'll be really clear to you once I give you some instances. For example, men, it turns out, in polling data and in research all over the planet, across cultures, across different economies and different cultural backgrounds, different histories, different countries, men tend to overperceive the sexual interest of women in them. That is, they have a false positive. They tend, this is not all men, but there's a correlation here, that men tend to think that women are interested in them sexually more often than they actually are. So men err on the high side here. Oh yeah, she's into me. Men will say that more often. Okay, now that's a false positive because it turns out not all of those women are into them. Not all those women are actually sexually interested in those men. So he will think that more women are interested in him than are not. Part of the reason for this is that there's not really a bad downside in terms of evolution. There's not a serious consequence to his making that kind of mistake. That is, hookups and sperm and sexual connection are pretty easy and cheap for men, and distributing their genetic material doesn't have a lot of consequences. So doing that, hey, you never know. You throw a bunch of darts at the board, and maybe you'll hit the bullseye once in a while. And when you do, then you score, and you manage to pass on your genes to the next generation. This is a bit of controversial discussion here in the background. Whereas women, there's a correlation that women tend to, not all of them, but some, there's a correlation for women to underperceive the sexual interest of men. That is, women will go, when you point out to your female friend, oh, you guys are connecting, aren't you? You guys are hooking up. Oh no, it's not like that. We're just friends. How many times have you heard a female friend say, oh no, we're just friends. It's not like that. And you're like, no, dude, he's into you. He's likes you. He's sexually interested in you. And the woman says, oh, no, we're just friends. It's not like that. Okay, that's her underperceiving the sexual interest, and that's him overperceiving the sexual interest. Okay, and it turns out there's an evolutionary explanation for that one too. For women, it pays to be more selective, to be more careful, to be more watchful, and to be more discerning about which men they connect with, because sexually the consequences of getting pregnant and having a baby are very costly. It takes a lot from her to gestate and then carry a baby to term and then to be saddled with the responsibility of dealing with the baby. So she, by sort of evolutionary lights, has to be careful about and selective about who she chooses. So she tends to underperceive sexual interests of men and then be more selective about which ones, where the guys are like, I'll just do it with anybody. Another example is like my Garcia Effect example from the last slide, believing that a food source is poisonous when it's not. That's an example of a false positive. Believing that it's safe when it's poisonous is a false negative. And the false positive mistake in this case is less costly than the false negative mistake in this case. If you believe that something's safe when it's not, you're going to end up as a dead hominid, right? But if you believe that the food source is poisonous when it's not, you're going to be cautious. You'll miss out on a few calories, but you will have avoided the poisonous berries. And there's another phenomenon here that's super interesting where it's called Batesian mimicry, where animals have evolved to mimic other dangerous animals to capitalize on the EMT or the false positive error rates about dangers or threats in other animals. So the eastern coral snake, for instance, has a red, yellow, and black stripe. The scarlet king snake, which is non-venomous, also has a yellow, black, and red stripe, but they're in different orders. But it's very easy for you and for me and for lots of other animals to mistake a king snake for a coral snake. And if you've managed to figure out that coral snakes are dangerous, I mean, just looking at those snakes probably bothers you. You mistake all snakes for venomous snakes. The scarlet king snake is capitalizing on your propensity or other animals' propensity to overgeneralize and stay away from coral snakes just by imitating the color stripes on the bodies. There's also some other interesting phenomena here. One of them is the overperception of sexual interest by others in your mate. Men are especially prone to do that one. The overperception of aggression in outsider racial or tribal groups. We've all been sort of victimized by this in recent American political culture. In many cases, we are built to believe falsehoods and make errors when those errors tend to facilitate survival. That's the big point about EMT that I want to make here that supplements this discussion in Kahneman and explains some of the behavior of System 1. Okay, so you're a machine for jumping to conclusions. Jumping to conclusions is efficient if the conclusions are likely to be correct and the costs of an occasional mistake are acceptable, and if the jump saves time and effort. Jumping to conclusions is risky when the situation is unfamiliar, the stakes are high, and there is no time to collect more information. Nice quote from Kahneman. What's the solution in this kind of case? Deliberate intervention of System 2. So System 1 is the low-level limbic system, amygdala, fast processing of what's going on in my environment, the thing that leads me to flinch when I'm seeing something, something approaches my eye. And System 2 is this frontal lobe, slower, more ponderous, rational thinking, reasoning, evidence gathering, a set of systems in my brain. And one of the things you can do to improve your performance is to get System 2 to step in when System 1 is offering quick and dirty answers that have a higher error rate. Our quicker tendencies may serve us very well, says Kahneman, but we may be able to do better in situations where we know that we have the biases and we can slow down, reflect, gather more information, and generate a better quality decision. And I can be really explicit here. That book that I referenced in the previous slide from David Buss about the conflict between men and women when men behave badly, Buss talks about this phenomena. It's the overperception of sexual interest from women coming from men that leads men so often to send women sexually explicit pictures, the unsolicited dick pic, for example, right? By and large, men tend to do that much more than women do it. Why? Because men overperceive the sexual interest that women have in them. Okay, so here's a very good example. If you know that evolution has built you this way, and you know that you have this disposition to either overperceive sexual interest or underperceive sexual interest, then you can mitigate, you can modify, you can change your behavior by the deliberate invention of System 2. Almost universally, women oppose getting unsolicited, sexually explicit pictures from some guy they know. Almost every woman in the polling data says that that's gross, they wish it didn't happen, they don't like it, yet men continue doing it. So here's a very good example. Now that you know that, now that we both understand it, we can all understand and modify our behavior by the deliberate intervention of System 2, by thinking about it, by understanding the reasoning, by understanding what's going on, and modifying our behaviors. Okay, so another interesting System 1 feature that comes out here is what Kahneman calls or at least I'm going to title it cognitive limits, belief, and cognitive loading. So here's an example from Dan Gilbert, where they had subjects hold a string of digits in memory while reading nonsense sentences like "a dinka is a flame," each of which was accompanied by the word true or false. Okay, so here's you, test subject. You're supposed to remember some numbers, and then you read that sentence, and then it says true, or maybe it says false, and you go through a whole bunch of these. And then later we ask you which sentences were true and which were false. those subjects were more likely than a control group to remember the false sentences as true. Okay, so here's what's going on. That when you're loaded, when you've got cognitive work you're doing in the background, like when your laptop is running slow because it's got too many background processes going on, too many applications are open. When your brain, which is a metabolic organic system, is like that, when it's busy, when it's working, and you give it a task, it's more likely to believe something that's nonsensical to believe is true. It's more likely to accept it, which is the easier, less cognitive loading task. So you're a meat system with limits. And if we load that system up, we can make its performance degrade, and we can make it degrade in predictable bad ways. Never forget that your cognitive system for figuring out the truth is organic. It's made out of biological cells. It's made of meat. It has energy needs and metabolism that get overtaxed. It runs out of glycogen. Its performance degrades at the end of the day when you're multitasking after a run, when you're tired. There's some famous research in here in Kahneman about how judges are more likely to give out harsh sentences before lunch, and then after lunch for the very same crimes, they'll give out softer sentences, which is really chilling, right? It just has to do with that judge needing a sandwich makes the difference between you getting 6 years and you getting 10 years in prison. It's a metabolic system that runs out of energy. Or if you like another metaphor, consider your laptop that has too many programs running in the background, slowing down its performance. Okay, so how does it work? How does it function? It works by association. The mechanism whereby neurons learn is simple. You just put the two things together and the neurons lock them up and associate them. This is called long-term potentiation. This is also not in Kahneman. LTP is a persistent strengthening of synapses based on recent patterns of activity. That when something happens in your experience, those synapses, those synaptic connections between those neurons get strengthened, and all of the other neurons that would have connected up different phenomena in your experience, they don't associate, they don't strengthen their connection. By repeating falsehoods, for example, again and again, large portions of the population have come to believe, and forgive me if this is politically charged, but it's true, and I can't ignore this example. There are large percentages of the population right now that think that the vaccine is more dangerous than COVID itself, which is demonstrably false. That is, for example, and you can look at my risk inversion lecture for more details about this. The complications for the vaccine, like the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, are approximately 1 in 10 million, whereas the number of deaths per million COVID patients is 17,000. That is 17,000 people die from COVID out of 1 million who get it. Give 10 million people the vaccine and one or a few will get complications, right? So nevertheless, repeating these doubts and worries about the vaccine being dangerous over and over again makes people believe it. That's why large percentages of the population still believe that Barack Obama is a Muslim. It's not true. It's demonstrably false, but it's been repeated so many times by so many people that people just think it's true just by mere association. Also, they believe that Obama wasn't born in the US, which is also false. And these days, lots of people believe that Trump won the 2020 election. And we know all this information has come out, that lots of politicians are actually aware of these facts. They're aware that mere repetition and just saying a blatant falsehood over and over again will get people to accept it as true. And that's this association and repetition point that Kahneman's making in the book. We're also built to confirm, not disconfirm. And this is going to be kind of hard to get your head around. But Kahneman discusses confirmation bias. And this is the tendency to look for or notice evidence that supports a favored hypothesis while ignoring or neglecting evidence that would refute it. So what does that mean? According to Kahneman, when people are trying to determine whether a sentence like Sam is considerate is true, they'll use a positive test strategy. They won't try to disprove it. They'll try to find examples that prove it to be true. This means that they tend to ask questions designed to produce answers that would tend to confirm the hypothesis. And what happens is that confirmation It's fast and cheap, and it's often effective. It's good enough to get me by to the next day. Whereas disconfirmation, searching for evidence that would disprove the sentence, is slow, it's work intensive, it takes time, it's heavy on cognitive resources. Confirmation bias is the mother of all fallacies. It's one of the mistakes we make most often, and it's that your system is quickly finding evidence that supports your hypothesis and then just moving on without bothering to go searching for costly, effortful disconfirmation cases. Okay, so here's another example. This is called the halo effect. Let me just ask you this question. Consider Alan, and we describe Alan as intelligent, industrious, impulsive, critical, stubborn, and envious. Contrast Alan to Ben, who is envious, stubborn, critical, impulsive, industrious, and intelligent. Now you'll notice that both of those are exactly the same. They've just reversed the order. Alan is the one that people will view more favorably when you give them these two examples. You usually separate them. And this is called the halo effect. And it's very simple. We have limited cognitive capacity. System 1 processes quickly with the information it has, and order matters. So since you said about Alan first that he was intelligent, and you said it about Ben that he was intelligent last, the first favorable impression of Alan will win out over the fact that that Ben is also intelligent. Also, overconfidence. All right, so here's another phenomena, one of the products or byproducts of the way System 1 works. And this acronym here from Kahneman stands for what you see is all there is. And this is how System 1 operates. It tends to take just what's in front of it and think that's everything that there is in the world to worry about. Since our systems favor the results we get fast, early, and easy, we often stop too soon, we jump to conclusions, and we think our hasty decisions are of better quality than they actually are. So take some time to read carefully and focus on what Kahneman says about the what you see is all there is phenomena. A lot of evidence and information that would be crucial to making good decisions ends up missing from our picture because you think you've got enough information to move on and you don't bother going, digging, and looking for possible disconfirmation. And then as a result, our subjective confidence isn't very sensitive to the quantity or quality of the evidence. Okay, so first off, you make a hasty generalization on the basis of very little information, and then at the metacognitive level, you evaluate. If I ask you, how good is your evidence? You go, oh, it's pretty good. How confident are you? I'm pretty confident. So there's two things going wrong. You make a decision too quickly, and then you think it's a high-quality decision, where in both cases, the decision's bad and your assessment of the quality of the decision is bad. That's what overconfidence amounts to. So it's these metacognitive judgments and calibrations that probably we could benefit the most from analyzing and reflecting on what Kahneman's getting at. Here's another phenomena that's a System 1 phenomena. It's called the framing effect. It's similar to the halo effect. One way to exploit our fast, sloppy decision belief engine is by framing. That is the way you frame or the way you discuss or the way you present a question or a problem or an issue will nudge people to make one decision or another. So the example I've used here is a surgery consent form. And if you put it explicitly on the consent form that there's a 90% chance of success versus a 10% risk of complications, people will sign or answer or sign on the consent form at different rates because they're worried in one case more than the other. Different ways of presenting information evokes different emotions and distorts our judgments of it. Ice cream, you'll know this example, that is described as 90% fat-free is more appealing than ice cream that is labeled 10% fat. The other day I was in the store and they were marketing some corn tortillas as gluten-free, as if they had improved it somehow, where corn tortillas were always gluten-free. They never had gluten in them. But if gluten's the thing you worry about, then by framing it that way and calling them gluten-free, like, oh, well, I want to be gluten-free, I'm going to take that off and add that to my diet. Another phenomena here that System 1 is that sort of betrays us is called substitution. And what we do is we substitute questions. We often substitute an easier question or task when given one that requires cognitive investment and work, and you answer the easier one and ignore the harder one. So there's some terms here in Kahneman that will help us understand what's going on. There's a target question, which is the actual assessment or question you got asked, the thing you're trying to answer. And the heuristic question is the simpler question that you answer instead. So there's the target question, the heuristic question, and keep clear on that distinction when you're going through Kahneman. And a heuristic, and I've used this term several times now, but let me clarify it a bit, is a simple procedure that helps you find adequate, though often imperfect, answers to difficult questions. That's your system giving quick and dirty answers that sometimes are wrong, but it does it good enough to get by. Okay, so in the substitution cases, a heuristic is a simple procedure that helps find adequate, though often imperfect, answers to difficult questions. So in the substitution heuristic, what happens is the task that I'm being asked to solve or to deal with, is it hard? Well, I substitute something easy. Kahneman talks about the affect heuristic. And what happens here is that you get tasked with a job to answer a question, and you answer the question, well, do I like it? Is it feel good? Is it good? Or do I not like it? Then it's bad. I'll give you an example. It's a sort of a caveman notion, right? So Gronk says, no, like, kill. I don't like that question when it's being asked, so it must be bad. So my example here is, try thinking about this question without your feelings affecting the answer at all. Is it okay to do cocaine? Or how about heroin? Now, very, very hard for you to answer that question without your feelings about it, because the heroin or cocaine question will invoke feelings in you. It'll give you a visceral limbic system reaction, and it's very hard for you to assess the safety of cocaine without those feelings sort of clouding the way you look at it. Lots of drug discussions are this way, or lots of controversial issues. Same with abortion. That where our feelings intrude and we give an answer that's based on the feelings, not given on sort of objective analyses of safety or danger or what have you. Now, let me be clear. Heuristics or these shortcuts are not necessarily bad. It's a trade-off between resources, importance, time, error rates, and the consequences of getting it wrong. Heuristics are what evolution came up with to get us by, to have us survive, and they oftentimes work very well, but it's good for us, according to Kahneman, to know when we're in an environment where we're likely to go off the rails because of them. Evolution settled on lots of procedures that are just good enough to get you by, but maybe you could do better with some more training and work. Okay, so I'm going to run through these 10 or 12 wordy, detailed bullet points. These are in Kahneman, and I'm going to let you read them more carefully. Pause the video if you need to. But the point is that he's filling in our system of picture, filling in our picture of system one, and fleshing out lots of the details about how system one works. So the distinction, the dual process theory between system one and system two got introduced in the early chapters, and now we're starting to get down into the details and the weeds and unpack exactly how that works. So there's a bunch of important details where he's summarizing what he said about system one, and I'll have them on my slide, and for your purposes, you can go back and look at these and evaluate them in Kahneman. All right, so what have we done in chapters 6 through 9? System one's trade-offs of accuracy for speed in many cases leads us to believe too fast on too little information without checking, with using our emotions. We have, as a result of the way our neurons are built, because of long-term potentiation, because of how the neurological connections or synaptic connections happen, we have active and passive expectations about what happens in the world. We are, I've argued, overactive causal theorizers, which leads us to make a certain kind of mistake very often in the world when we're trying to figure out what's happening or what's safe, what's not. I've added this discussion about the Garcia Effect. We've talked at length about the ways in which our system one jumps to conclusions, when and why and how, which way does the bias go. I've introduced some of the background discussion about error management theory and how some kinds of biases seem to have been selected for by evolution that makes us err on certain sides of bad decisions or wrong decisions. Kahneman's introduced the halo effect. He's got this important acronym, what you see is all there is, that he discusses at length. We've talked about the affect heuristic, where you substitute in a feeling about something being good or bad, instead of answering the actual question in mind. And that's part of this larger discussion about substitutions. All right, so that's my perhaps overlong discussion of Kahneman's chapters 6 through 9 for our class.